In this video, I'm going to walk teachers through day 17, Unit 5, day 17, which is the first lesson in a two-day lesson on the superpower rivalry during the Cold War between the US and the USSR. This lesson has students examining the ideas and events that defined the Cold War, and they're going to analyze documents to better contextualize the superpower rivalry. It starts off with an examination of this map, which at first students are going to see it and think it's very weird looking. It's sort of a bird's eye view of the globe, but it can give you a lot of information about the arms race during the Cold War. So some things students really should be able to point out is just how many weapons the Soviet Union had amassed and how many the United States had. Another thing they can notice is that it's Eastern Hemisphere versus Western Hemisphere. Also, they should be able to see NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. So some students might be like, okay, well, Warsaw Pact had to do with the Soviet Union. NATO had to do with the United States. Some things that you might want to push for your students to see is that the United States had missiles, had air bases outside of the Eastern Hemisphere. Another thing that you might want the students to see is that the United States had air bases outside of the Western Hemisphere in their ally nations, whereas the Soviet Union did not really have any air bases in the Western Hemisphere. So initially, if students are like, oh, well, the Soviets had so many more air bases and so many more missile sites, you might push back on that and ask them, well, what advantages did the United States have that the Soviet Union did not? You have a slide here with a little bit of notes, and the key ideas are that the Soviet Union and the USA emerged from World War II as the major superpowers. The other new information here is that NATO was the alliance that supported the United States, and the Warsaw Pact supported the Soviet Union. And the Warsaw Pact does not exist anymore, but NATO does. So students might come across that in the news or social media even today. Next, you're going to have students watch this video, which just gives them an idea of what it was like to be a kid in New York City during the Cold War, during the arms race, during the atomic age. The really cool thing about this video is that it was actually made in Astoria, Queens, and it was actually used. It's 9 minutes long, so you don't need to watch the whole thing for students to get the general idea. But it could be cool to show them just the credits at the end too, because it does say that it was made in Astoria. This is also going to closely connect to the work that students do in lesson 20, in day 20 of this unit. So now you're going to introduce the independent work, which does talk about the Cold War over the course of the 45 years that it happened. I strongly suggest pairing students up if you can to jigsaw these two. You're going to have students look at the space race and at the arms race, and they're really getting a lot of information to go through. So you can really give them a lot more time to dig deep into one of these, and then share with each other. So if you're going to jigsaw, the space race is probably the easier of the two options here. They're going to read that article and answer these questions about the space race. The other thing about the space race is if you give a student time to read about the space race, they did already learn a little bit more about the atomic bombs in the opening part of the lesson. So if you have a student that needs a little more time, give them the space race to examine closely, and then give your other student the arms race, in which they have both an article and a video that they can watch. And they've got a few more questions here. So it's a good way to differentiate, but also make sure everyone gets all the information. That's the end of lesson 2. So if you are going to do jigsawing, you might want to add a slide about sharing what they learned from each other, or just a slide that gives them space to jigsaw and share with each other. But the next lesson is going to go into more about the Cold War and not repeat this. So check out that second video to see what the next lesson does.